In this video we're going to have a look at another absolute spectacular game played in round 2 of the US Championships. It's with the white pieces, Fabiano Caruana against Levon Aronian. And so many fascinating things are happening in this game. From the beginning till the end, I'm pretty sure you will enjoy every bit of this game. So let's dive straight into the action. And if you would like to follow more of this US Championships, make sure to subscribe to the channel and I'll keep you up to date. Here, Fabi opens the game with the move 1e4. e6, it's the French defense, popular opening, and Levon Aronian has been playing this quite frequently recently. So this doesn't come as a surprise to Fabi. And look what happens in the opening. d4, d5, knight c3, knight f6. It's the classical variation. e5, attacking the knight goes back to d7. Now white occupies the center with the move f4, c5. Black is trying to counter the pawn on d4 with possible pressure against it. And now this position has been played so many times, and by far the most common move here is to continue developing with knight f3. But Fabi is here the first one to come up with a remarkable move. He captures the pawn on c5. Now the move in itself is not new, it has been seen before, but if you compare it with knight f3, I mean knight f3 develops a piece, it's much more useful. But why does Fabi captures here the pawn on c5? Well, let's have a look. Knight c6 was played. It's clear that the pawn on c5 is not running away. Knight c6 is a good developing move, and black keeps the options open of how to recapture on c5, either with a knight or with a bishop. But now, the real surprise comes now, as here the bishop goes to d2. Absolute stunning idea, and has almost never been played, not at high level for sure. And the idea is that, well, if the bishop is on e3, the bishop in general is more vulnerable, can potentially be exchanged by black's bishop. And if you do take now with the bishop on c5, was not played in the game, there is this idea of developing the queen to g4, super aggressive move. With the aim of targeting the pawn. Maybe the bishop comes here, the knight goes there, maybe you launch your h-pawn, h4, h5, etc. This looks quite interesting, and especially when you're not prepared for it, looks like a very good practical choice of Caruana. So instead, after bishop d2, Aronian decided to take with the knight instead. So now the whole idea with queen g4 doesn't make sense, as the pawn is still defended by the bishop. And well, after knight f3, the bishop goes to e7, only now white goes with the bishop to e3. Remarkable idea, but it's clear that the knight on c5, even though it looks pretty active, it doesn't really exert pressure on white's center. So, well, looks like white is having a more pleasant position, controlling the blockading square on d4. And, well, definitely this also helps you to get a nice start of the game, to build up your position with confidence. And Aronian, okay, he is clearly surprised in the opening. He decided to castle, logical move. White goes for the move a3, also typical move. You may think maybe not the most important move to make here, but on a good day you may consider playing the move b2, b4 and kick the knight backward. So a3, it's quite a useful move. Black goes for the move a6. White played here the move bishop e2. And, well, now it's clear that black wants to develop his bishop from c8. So therefore he goes for the move b5. And now you see that with the pawn on a3, you're controlling the b4 square. So black doesn't have the chance here to play b5, b4 immediately. White castled. And now, again, it does look like a pretty normal French type of structure. Bishop to b7, and white places the queen on e1. Nice move. The queen is on its way to f2 to attack the knight. Maybe the rook can come to d1. It looks like all a bit more pleasant for white. And now another interesting moment in this game, as black is perhaps positionally speaking slightly worse. That's also because of that bishop on b7. It's staring at its own pawn on d5. It's a typical bad French bishop. So usually black is trying to compensate that structural weakness with dynamical counterplay. And therefore he goes for the move knight e4. And if you do take on e4, black takes back with the pawn, and potentially the diagonal for the bishop will be more open. So white is not interested in taking on e4, but instead plays the move bishop d3, attacking the knight on e4 for the second time, and white is threatening to win a pawn. Well, the principled move here is to take on c3, was played in the game, but I think that black underestimated white's response here, as instead of taking back with the queen, Fabi played here this move, pawn takes c3. Why would you voluntarily weaken your pawn structure on the queen side? Well, the queen prefers to go to the king side, maybe to g3, sometimes later on it can go to h3, to threaten mate, ideas with knight g5. All of a sudden, white does have quite a number of great pieces. f5 was played, also typical move trying to shut down the diagonal of this bishop on d3, but white captures with the pawn on f6. And well, there are various ways of recapturing. Taking with the rook is something the engine likes the most, but still I'm not sure if I would dare to make this move. It also gives up control over the g5 square, probably the knight can come in. In any case, Aronian played here bishop takes f6, and now the bishop looks nice. It's attacking the pawn on c3. Well, it's still defended by the queen, so not an immediate threat, but white got to think about that. But here the main drawback is that white can now come with his bishop to c5 to hit the rook on f8 and also attack the pawn on e6. Rook e8 is forced, and now another very interesting moment in the game, as all of a sudden there is a very strong move here for white, which was missed by both players. It is this move knight g5. I'm pretty sure that both players were looking at it, but didn't take it seriously. You're attacking the pawn on h7 and also the pawn on e6. But the main point is that if you do take twice on g5, then white can put his queen on f2, and there is a huge threat of entering with the queen on f7, giving a check and also hitting the bishop on b7. And apparently this is very difficult for black to defend against. Well, it was not played in the game. In the game, Caruana played here queen g3, and that's probably a move I would have played myself as well. It feels very natural to bring your queen to the king side and prepare the rook to join play as well. And now, look at that pawn on c3. It is poisoned. If you do take it, then there is this typical sacrifice on h7. Bishop takes h7, king takes, and now the knight comes in with check. And if the king goes back, it is queen h3, followed by queen h7 with checkmate, as the knight and bishop are taking away the remaining squares from the black king. So pawn cannot be taken. Aronian understands these kind of basic tactical ideas. Instead played here queen c7. So that the queen is pinning the pawn on f4, but also helping out along the 7th rank. Now king h1 was played. Black goes for the move g6. Also a typical move so that your queen is helping along the 7th rank. And here white played the move bishop to d4. Very positional move. And you basically say that please take my bishop on d4. In that case I can take back with the pawn. Pawn structure is significantly improved now, while the bishop on b7 is out of place. So this gives white an overwhelming positional advantage. Black was not interested in taking the bishop, played here the move rook f8 to support the bishop on f6. And here white is having a dream French type of position. And how to improve it? Launch the h-pawn. Typical idea to prepare the move h5. Intensifying the pressure against the pawn on g6. Black swings over with the queen to g7. So queen is helping in defense, supporting the bishop, supporting the pawn. Rook ae1, attacking the pawn on e6, bringing your last piece into the game. Very standard procedure. Rook ae8, black defends it. And now white continues with trading off dark squared bishops. Nice positional move. Rook takes f6 was played. And here the knight comes in to d4, once again hoping to improve the pawn structure. And well, white is better, but things are perhaps not that simple if black has the chance here to play the move e5. It was not played for some reason by Aronian, but it looks like black is fighting his way back into the game. definitely requires a bit of calculation, but it seems to be working out well. But instead, the move King H8 was played, getting out of the G file. White plays the move Rook F3. So all of a sudden there are ideas now also to double on the E file and target the pawn on E6. That backward pawn can potentially be a nuisance for Black's pieces to defend it. Queen E7 played. The queen comes back in defense, defending the pawn. Queen to G5. Nice square for the queen. And Black goes back with the knight to D8, with the aim that after H5, the knight comes over to F7 to attack the queen. Queen goes to H4, but still the position does look a bit shaky. White has a huge threat here to take on G6. Apparently, things are still playable for Black if he finds the right move. Aronian failed to do so. He could have gone here for knight d6. Very instructive move, guys. If you take that pawn, there is a rook takes g6. Now you're attacking the queen. If you take on e7 first, now Black shouldn't take back because of the rook hanging on g6. But here, the intermediate move, rook h6 check, saves the rook. King to g1, rook takes e7. Okay, white is better, but Black is fighting here. It was not played in the game. Instead, Aronian played this move. Pawn takes h5. This is really weakening Black's king, but obviously you can't take the pawn here yet. It runs into rook h6 as the knight defends the rook. But look what White played here. White, instead of capturing the pawn, played this move g4. Beautiful idea. You cannot take the pawn. It will lead to checkmate on h7. So Black instead tried to counter here with the move e5, opening up the center, hoping that at the right moment White's king can also become vulnerable. With position open, it's all about who is coming first to hit the opponent's king. White continues because, well, the pawn on e5 is actually pinned. So White continues here with the move g5, attacking the rook. Rook goes away, and only now you take the pawn on h5, as here the pawn on g5 covers the h6 square. Rook h6 is not possible. White is threatening mate in one. Black advances the pawn to e4, closing that diagonal, attacking the rook, attacking the bishop. Well, not really. As I said already, the e file is still closed. So rook h3 played, threatening mate once again, and the knight comes in to d6. So knight is looking great. The queen defends. The pawn on h7. White continues here with g6, attacking the pawn on h7 one more time. And Aronian played here this move, bishop c8. He is attacking the rook on a3. And this is, in fact, the critical moment in the game. This is a moment to pause your video for a second and think for yourself, what is the best move? And this is your chance to do better than world's number 3. It's actually a beautiful exercise. It's something, if you are reading a book or solving a puzzle online, you may come up with this move. But when you're playing in a game, a real game, like Fabi is here at this point, it's a kind of move which is very difficult to find, and probably it's just impossible. It's an invisible move, a move which would not have crossed my mind for sure at this stage. But it's White to play and win the game here. It's a stunning move. Well, Fabi played here the move rook h2. It's definitely not the best move. And you may consider taking the pawn on h7, but that's also not so great. I mean, if you swap the queens and then put a king on g8, I mean, Black is fighting his way back into the game. The bishop is in the threat. If the bishop goes away, you can put a knight on f5. The rook will wrap up the pawn on g6. Black is back. But the key move here, and this is absolutely fantastic. It's already the move of the tournament, but it was not played in the game. Look at this. It's knight e6, guys. Why would you put your knight on a square where it can be taken by both the bishop and the queen? Well, first things first. If you do take with the queen is no longer defending the 7th rank. It's queen takes h7 with checkmate. If you do take with the bishop, the queen is still defending that mating threat. But the problem is that now the queen no longer covers the e5 square. So White can come in with the queen to e5. It's a blockading sacrifice. is a fantastic check. If you block here with the queen, queen g7, it's rook takes h7 and mate to follow as the queen on g7 is pinned, can be taken next. The alternative is to walk with your king towards the center, but after king g8, you take with the pawn on h7 with check, and all these files are getting opened. If you take on h7, you can take with the rook. If the king goes away, you can just queen your h-pawn and white will be up material. It's just completely game over in that case. So that is a fantastic idea. And of course, I see you also wondering why knight e6. If black doesn't capture it, well, what's the main idea behind it? Well, once again, then the e5 square is no longer guarded, and white has this huge threat of centralizing the queen with check, followed by opening up the files towards the king. So this will lead to checkmate very, very soon. Stunning idea. Instead, white played rook h2. But then, and that's one of the other main ideas of black's last move, bishop c8, this move is too slow, rook h2. It gives black time here to go rook b7 to defend the 7th rank. And, well, obviously, knight e6 now, it's not such a good idea. You can just take with the queen as the rook takes over the defensive task of the queen. In the game, there followed bishop e2. The bishop is trying to come back into defense. Queen f6. So queen is helping, threatening to take the pawn. Rook is helping as well. Bishop g4 looks like still a nice move to keep the initiative going. But rook g1 was played. Perhaps with ideas to take on h7 and maybe rook g8 afterwards. So black quickly brings the rook into defense as well. And black is all right here. Queen g5, offering the exchange of queens. And now, having faced such a strong attack, a lot of people will immediately capture on g5. But Aronian is super cool. Played here rook f8, that's a good move. And now the rook is also attacking the pawn on f4. Queen e5 played. If you do take on f4, there is a rook takes h7 again. My mouse is struggling a bit, but you can just take here on h7, and that's just game over. So better don't do that. Now Aronian felt like, let's swap queens. Pawn takes e5. Knight f5 played. Now looks like knights are coming off the board as well. Rook to g5, putting more pressure there. And, well, you don't really want to take on d4. Once again, it helps white to improve the structure. Knight e7 is a good move. And then you hit the pawn on g6 one more time. Rook takes h7 played. Now the rooks are coming off the board. And all of a sudden, we have an endgame with a rook, 2 minor pieces, and 4 pawns each. e6, rook f6, bishop to h5 with the idea to come to f7 and defend the pawn. You gotta watch out here. Taking the pawn on e6 may run into rook e5 ideas when there are some issues along the e-file. So before taking the pawn, black played here this move, rook h6, to pin the bishop on h5. King to g1, stepping out of that pin. And now bishop takes e6 was played, rook e5. And here the knight comes to g6. Nice move to hit the rook on e5. If you take first on g6, well, there is rook takes g6 with check. And black is absolutely fine. He's a pawn up, in fact. So rook takes e6 played, rook takes h5, rook takes a6. It's now rook and knight versus rook and knight. Rook h3, but look at white's pawns. They are quite vulnerable. Knight takes b5. White captures another pawn. However, it's also about the quality of pawns. And to be honest, I feel a little bit scared here as white. That e-pawn can become quite powerful. And, well, black played here knight f4. You can see there are some ideas to bring up the e-pawn. Perhaps there are even some mating ideas, possibly. Rook e7 is a good move. King g6, rook e7, getting the rook behind that passed pawn. Rook could not go to e6 right away as the knight covered that square. So rook is pretty well placed on e7 now. Rook h8, knight c7, king f6. And, well, black is trying to use the central pawns in the long run. And Fabi says, well, I have had my best time in this game. Let's liquidate into a theoretical drawn endgame. With knight takes d5, he is trading off the remaining pawns. It's rook and knight versus rook and 3 pawns. Now, these pawns are very weak, and black can wrap them up pretty soon. King e5, of course, as white, you always have to watch out for knight forks in this type of endgame. But it shouldn't be too problematic. Look at this. I just show you the remaining moves. Rook h2, king e3. Well, don't take the pawn on c2 right away. There's king d3. Rook got to keep the knight defended. If you go rook c1, well, there is rook c7, and white wins back the piece with a drawn position. Black instead played rook h3, king d2, knight check, king c1, rook takes pawn, king b2. And here white can just easily save the pawn on c2. But even without that pawn, it would be a theoretical draw. So everything looks pretty good. Here, once again, you just have to be careful. Don't play a move like king c1. It allows it allows rook a1 with checkmate thanks to the knight on c4. So that's something you should avoid. But just put the rook away. Rook b8. King goes to e4. Some more checks. Now, interesting move is that check on the back rank can be parried by rook to d1. So that doesn't work either. King e3 played, rook e7. There are a number of checks now. The rook comes back to the third rank, forcing the king to go away again. Rook b3. And black is simply unable to make progress here. And at this point, Aronian said, well, I offer the exchange of rooks. White, of course, accepted that and even gave up the pawn on c2, because with only one knight, you cannot win the game. Well, I thought this was a spectacular game with that beautiful possibility for white to win the game in great style. In this position on move 34, white missed that stunning move, knight e6. Well, let me know in the comments, what do you think? Is this also this kind of move you would have missed in your own games? Would be interesting to see more games in this event, because I have the feeling that some very exciting games are going to be played in this event. So stay tuned for more updates, and I'll keep you posted.